Whenever we make a video, we often focus on battles, wars, and Jerusalem. And Israel's involvement never seems to fade from history. But there's one question people always ask. What's your source for all this? Where do you get all this information from? The truth is, there isn't a single hidden source. The foundation of everything I share is drawn from classical Islamic history books. Books like Tariq al-Tabari, Ibn al-Athir, Ibn Kathir, and Ibn Khaldun, among many others. Across the world, these are considered the pillars of Islamic history. But here's an even bigger question. What are the sources of these books themselves? Where did they come from? The stories of these legendary scholars and their books are fascinating. Let's go back over 1,400 years to the time right after the death of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. During the reigns of the first caliphs Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, may Allah be pleased with them, no official history of Islam was written. Most of the companions were alive, and they already knew every detail of Islamic history firsthand. As the companions began passing away, the new generations of Muslims started forgetting key events like the battles of Badr, Uhud, and Khandaq. Many young Muslims became more fascinated by the heroes of the Roman and Persian empires, like Heraclius and Rustam, than by Islamic figures like Khalid ibn Walid and Ali Rah. It was at this point that Caliph Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, a just and visionary ruler, decided to act. He summoned one of the greatest scholars of his time, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, and ordered him to travel and lecture Muslims about the Prophet's life. At this time, only a few elderly companions were still alive. Ibn Shihab studied directly with them, recorded what he learned, and passed this knowledge to his students. Two of his most famous students were Ibn Ishaq and Imam Malik. Eventually, Ibn Shihab wrote the first historical record of Islam. But soon after completing this monumental work, Caliph Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was assassinated. Just 30 years later, the entire Umayyad Caliphate collapsed, and with it, Ibn Shihab's book disappeared from history. After the fall of the Umayyads, the Abbasid Caliphate rose to power. Like the Umayyads, the Abbasids had many flaws, but one thing stood out. They had an insatiable love for knowledge. In fact, an Abbasid caliph once ended a war with the Roman Empire in exchange for a single book of Greek philosophy by Plato. Caliph al-Mansur, the Abbasid ruler, built a new capital, Baghdad, and established the world's largest library, the legendary House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah. He summoned Ibn Ishaq, a student of Ibn Shihab, and commanded him to write a complete history of the world, starting from Adam all the way to their own time. Ibn Ishaq did exactly that, producing the first complete Islamic history book. But this book too vanished over time. Why did these early books disappear? The answer is simple. Muslims had no paper technology. Books were written on an expensive and fragile material called papyrus, made by pressing together plant strips. At this time, only China had discovered true papermaking, and they kept this technology a closely guarded secret. That changed after a major battle between the Abbasids and the Chinese. The Abbasids defeated the Chinese army and captured thousands of soldiers. Among these prisoners were experts who knew the art of papermaking. This was a game changer. Later, during the reign of the great Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid, paper technology revolutionized the Muslim world. Harun built the world's largest paper mill next to the House of Wisdom. Soon, thousands of books could be copied and distributed. This marked the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age, an era that changed the course of human civilization. For the first time, scholars wrote and preserved massive works of knowledge. It was during this era that the 6 authentic hadith collections, like Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, were compiled. One of Ibn Ishaq's students, Ibn Hisham, rewrote his teacher's lost book. Thanks to paper technology, Ibn Hisham's work survived to this day and remains the oldest surviving book of Islamic history. Following him, more scholars contributed. Al-Waqidi wrote his own monumental history, though some of his narrations are debated. His student Ibn Sa'd wrote Tabaq, Ibn Sa'd, recording the lives of the Prophet's companions. Then came Imam al-Tabari, one of the greatest historians in history, who compiled Tariq al-Tabari. This masterpiece covered history from Adam to the Abbasid period. Imam al-Tabari was known for his humility. Once his school offered him a treasure chest of gold coins as a reward, but he only took 10 dinars, saying, "This is my salary. I need nothing more." But after the Abbasids, things began to decline. Muslim unity weakened. This gave European crusaders the opportunity to attack and capture Jerusalem. Even then, many Muslim rulers seemed indifferent. The dream of reclaiming Palestine burned brighter in the hearts of scholars than in kings. Among these scholars was Imam Ibn Asakir, who wrote a 70-volume history of Damascus and inspired his students with stories of Muslim heroes. One of his students would become a legend, Salahuddin Alibi Saladin. Saladin marched with an army of 200,000 and eventually liberated Jerusalem, raising the flag of Islam over Al-Aqsa Mosque. Around the same time, a controversial book called Fadil Yazid glorified Yazid as a hero of Islam. This worried Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, who wrote a famous book exposing the truth about Yazid, preventing Muslims from rewriting history incorrectly. Meanwhile, Saladin's historian Ibn al-Athir documented his campaigns, as well as the story of Muhammad Ghori, the first Muslim ruler to conquer parts of India. But the Islamic Golden Age would soon face its deadliest enemy, the Mongols. Led by Genghis Khan, the Mongols burned city after city. His grandson Hulagu Khan eventually reached Baghdad. At this point, the Muslim world was so consumed by petty debates that they ignored the threat. Scholars argued over absurd topics like how many angels could fit on a needle's tip instead of preparing for war. When Hulagu entered Baghdad, he slaughtered everyone, regardless of sect. Blood flowed through the streets, turning the river red. The Mongols then destroyed the House of Wisdom and dumped its countless books into the river. The ink was so abundant that the river turned black for days. The Mongols also burned paper factories, erasing centuries of progress. This catastrophe marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. Muslims became so impoverished that they had to import paper from Europe, helping Europe rise as the new center of knowledge. Despite this devastation, one man wrote a monumental book, Ibn Kathir, his Al-Bidayah wal-Nihayah. The beginning and the end covers history from creation to the end of time. Later, Ibn Khaldun, considered the last great Muslim historian, wrote the Muqaddimah, masterpiece still taught at Harvard and Oxford, while Ibn Khaldun wrote his final works. A man in Europe invented a machine that would change the world forever, Johannes Gutenberg's printing press. This device allowed Europeans to print 4,000 pages a day, while Muslims were still hand-copying just 40 pages. At that time, the Ottoman Empire declared printing presses forbidden. Some scholars argued knowledge could only be transmitted by hand, while others feared it would undermine their authority. As Europe built hundreds of printing presses, the Muslim world had zero. This decision proved disastrous. Europe surged ahead, founding universities, libraries, and scientific revolutions, while Muslims fell behind. By the time the Ottomans allowed printing 300 years later, it was too late. Europe had already overtaken the Muslim world. And that is the tragic story of how the Islamic Golden Age was lost, its treasures drowned in rivers, and how a single invention changed the balance of power forever.